Across the galaxy, an agonized message radiates like fire. Humanity's greatest warship, the pride of Earth's fleet and the bedrock of hope for worlds great and small, has been lost. Panic gives way to disbelief in every known star system, and the unanswered question rings out. How could this have happened? Across the endless tapestry of stars, countless species had competed for power, territory, and, ultimately, survival for eons. Interstellar states waxed and waned, empires rising and falling like waves across a far-flung ocean. When the Orionic War began, very few knew the extent of the destruction that would come. Alliances were established rapidly. Whole civilizations evaporated almost overnight, and the unified galaxy that many had envisioned shattered into warring factions. And through it all, humanity loomed, a fledgling species by the measure of the ancients. But humans were surprisingly adaptable and persistent despite a relatively brief chapter on the interstellar stage. They colonized world after world, signed trade agreements with friendly powers, and resisted incursions from hostile forces with superior technology. For decades, a behemoth of a warship came to be the mainstay of humanity's defense, and also a representation of their grit, a cosmic fortress that spread throughout the known galaxy by three simple letters. TSF Aegis, Terran Star Force, Aegis. The Aegis wasn't merely a ship. It was the most powerful warship humanity had ever built, an 11-kilometer behemoth with unstoppable particle cannons, railgun turrets the size of city blocks, and next-generation shield technology allegedly scavenged from ancient alien artifacts. Its hull was a dark, obsidian-like composite, said to be almost indestructible. Official records said the Aegis had led dozens of victorious campaigns. The prime deterrent throughout the Great Orion conflict, it was a screen which even the most powerful fleets of alien ships would hesitate to challenge. Across thousands of star systems, the name Aegis stirred equal parts awe and dread. For humanity, it symbolized their unshakable hope for survival, proof that they wouldn't be defeated. The Aegis was a literal nightmare come true for enemy empires, capable of slicing swaths through entire fleets. It was said that no fleet could be unmatched alone. So whenever reports came of the Aegis repodulating into a contested theater of operations, enemy command staff would more often than not take their losses and redeploy rather than face almost certain annihilation. At the helm of the Aegis was Admiral Linnea Rhodes, one of the most revered explorers of them all. She was a AAA talent on Earth's Terran Star Force, heralded since her early days in the Force for her quick instincts and cool under pressure. Chosen to command the Aegis in the wake of the outbreak of the Great Orion conflict, Rhodes was herself legendary. Soldiers described her unflinching moral compass. Engineers hailed her uncanny ability to fuse battle plans with diplomatic guile, and rival fleets feared her fast, decisive plans of action. In many ways, the Aegis became a symbol of her resolve, the power in action and merciful, stepping into a battle to rescue an endangered civilian ship, and then disabling the threat with as little bloodshed as possible, and through unlikely alliances founded in compassion. So great was the Aegis's reputation that even Earth's most obstinate rivals grudgingly acknowledged respect. The Trellic Unity, which had previously been locked in a bloody stalemate with humanity, signed a truce only because they could not come up with a plan to counter the warship's potentially devastating defenses. The reptilian Grax Dominion, infamous for their unholy dreadnoughts, now having to tread around the Aegis conflicts with care, no longer able to trust in their numbers to win the day. And the Core Empire, an ancient civilization said to be in possession of super weapons of old, quietly bided their time before engaging in open conflict with Earth, unwilling to pit their relics against the unyielding Terran flagship. This aura of invincibility around the Aegis was no mere propaganda. In every fight, it had emerged unscathed, or so it seemed. Fueled by a quantum singularity core, the warship's shield matrix allegedly receded more quickly than enemy fire could strip it. Its hull plating was a non-Newtonian mix of advanced alloys and alien-based protective fields that would allow the ship to soak up direct impacts that would rip lesser vessels apart. The Aegis, here in time to fend off the invasion each and every time a vital Terran colony was threatened. And each time the legend of its invulnerability only grew. But even the greatest legends have flaws that lie buried under freight trains of myth. The Aegis was not without flaw, and Terran High Command knew it privately. Constant engagements had stressed her systems, and the specialized components employed in the advanced shield architecture were not easily replicated. Engineering logs had suggested microfractures in the hull due to repeated warp jumps, too minute to mean much one at a time, but in aggregate threatening structural integrity. Meanwhile, the quantum singularity core was rumored to occasionally destabilize, needing ever more elaborate calibrations to avoid catastrophic meltdown. Most waved away these anxieties as idle rumor. Earth needed every bit of hope the Aegis offered as the war continued unabated. The public believed without question that the warship was invincible, an unstoppable engine of humanity's salvation. This belief spread like fire over a dry prairie, lifting the spirits of Terran colonies, motivating new recruits to the Star Force, and filling allied species with the determination to stand their ground against the mutual foe. Then, suddenly, reality shattered in one cold communique. All Terran Star Force personnel, this is High Admiral Sokolov. The Aegis has been lost. A moment later, the message repeated, short and horrifying in its finality. Details were scant, confusion widespread. How could the Aegis, all that awesome and unmatched power, just disappear? Was it sabotaged? Swept away by a secret weapon? Swallowed by an anomaly? In the days after, shockwaves spread through human-managed space. Terran settlers who had so passionately believed in the warship's protection were shaken. Allied powers, one-time dependence on the Aegis as a keystone at the center of joint operations, rushed to reevaluate their stances. Dazed but aggrandized, enemies got a shot at Earth while it was dazed. Is this a trick? They asked, another clever Terran scheme. Others celebrated the apparent decline of the once invincible behemoth under their breath. Within hours, channels of communication brimmed with speculation. Some said the Aegis had gone rogue. Others claimed it had been destroyed in a supernova. Some said it had to be out there somewhere still, lost in transit in slip space waiting for the salvage team. But there was no solace from official channels. Terran High Command offered no explanation. The warship was simply gone. And with it, our species' greatest emblem of triumph evaporated, creating an empty, yawning vacuum of uncertainty. The implications were disastrous. And with the Aegis eliminated, would Earth's foes take advantage of the opening? Could the Terran morale survive a blow like that? More importantly, how had such a calamity occurred at all? Against the backdrop of swirling chaos, star systems across the Orion tendril prepared for what was feared by many to be the start of humanity's end. The story of what happened to the Aegis was rooted in its last mission, one shrouded in secrecy and desperation, and the truth of its disappearance could only be told by looking back at that mission. A few days before the loss of the warship, Admiral Linnea Rhodes had been issued an urgent directive from Terran High Command. That ancient and inscrutable power, the Core Empire, finally unfurled a doomsday device, swearing to unleash it on any civilization that would stand in their way. Months of rising tensions had led to fleets of the Core massing near a distant system known as Nidra Prime. Any diplomatic overtures were responded to with vague warnings that the Core would remake the galaxy should they be angered. Uncharacteristically, neither Allied nor enemy intelligence could information about the exact nature of the Core's doomsday weapon. Some said it was a planet killer, able to collapse stellar cores. Others suggested a bioengineered plague. For hegemony intelligence, however, it was too big of a threat to simply pass by. As a result, the Aegis was discreetly dispatched to Nidra Prime to investigate, and if need be, neutralize the threat. The specifics were known only to the highest levels of Terran leadership. Initially, even the remainder of the Star Force was told the Aegis was on a regular patrol. When Admiral Rhodes got there was no welcoming committee, no series of bleeps and whistles congratulating the man of the hour. Only a lonely star system circling through thick cosmic dust that blocked scan readings. The Aegis crept forward. Nidra Prime's lone habitable planet circled a dying sun, its surface said to be a maze of ancient scabs, a remnant of the Core's glory days. Weak energy signatures on the planet suggested there were advanced machines at work, though not enough to verify a massive superweapon. The warship's scanners fought against electromagnetic interference produced by the star's erratic flares. Rhodes and her bridge officers conducted every possible sensor sweep, but nothing conclusive was yielded. The whole system had, in a sense, been deliberately cloaked. Out of frustration, Rhodes approved a landing party, Marines, scientists, and a few sensor specialists, to look over possible sites on the surface. A cluster of core ships, outfitted for battle but currently dormant, patrolled the outer edge of the system like resentful sentinels. They showed no signs of aggression. On the Aegis, tension became taut. This was far too easy. The core, the cunning and the guile, did not leave anything this monumental undefended without a damned good reason. On the planet's surface, Terran Marines scoured abandoned compounds half buried in wind-whipped dunes. In the background rose ancient core architecture, towering spires covered in impossible-to-read glyphs. The team found incomplete data cores suggesting an experimental quantum lens, a device which warped space-time at a grand scale, perhaps sufficient to curve entire swathes of reality. The implications were staggering. Weaponized, it could devastate fleets in an instant or unleash cosmic phenomena no shield would survive. Alarmed, Admiral Rhodes instructed the team to collect any pertinent data and sabotage the technology if feasible. But as they began their extraction, the course trap sprung. Hidden drones released from below-ground hangars surrounded the Terran explorers. The core ships in orbit flared their engines, closing in on the Aegis. Rhodes immediately ordered the dispatch of her ground team home, but distress calls crackled across the transmissions as the Marines battled for their lives on the surface. In orbit, the Aegis was outgunned and outnumbered by superior core frigates, smaller than dreadnoughts but cutting with high-yield guns. Flashes of multi-hued energy eruptions hammered the warship's forward shields. The core hit in coordinated torrents, each pulse calculated to time out any brief shield rephase. But Admiral Rhodes, keeping a cool head, brought the Aegis's greater firepower to bear on the largest core ships and destroyed several in short order. But something was off. The core appeared more interested in grinding down the Aegis chunk by chunk than in saving their ships. Their plan was more about stalling than destruction. Meanwhile, the Terran ground team was fighting tooth and nail through labyrinthine corridors, trying to exfiltrate with the data. Captain Rourke, commanding the Marines, sent updates in ragged bursts. The drones also had built-in self-destruct charges, making every skirmish a possible suicide blast. Through the disorder, they managed to obtain a partial schematic of the quantum lens. They found allusions to a zero-state insertion, some last activation sequence that would unleash irresistible cosmic destruction. With time running out, they headed for their shuttles, hoping the Aegis would be able to give them orbital support. In the swirling orbit overhead of Nidra Prime, core reinforcements dogpiled wave after wave of core forces that had jumped into the system. The sheer amount of enemy ships became concerning. Despite the Aegis's heavy arsenal, it had to continuously adjust the frequencies of its shields to hold the endless attack at bay. Rhodes saw a pattern. These were suicidally bold tactics. Core frigates pummeled their same shield sectors one after another, chewing through energy reserves. The warship's shield generators burned hot, and engineers scrambled to juggle power feeds to avoid an overload. Then there was a terrible spike in sensor readings from the planet. A colossal wave of quantum vibrations erupted from far below the planet's crust. The device was still intact, thanks to the Terran ground team. It must be the core who activated it. Even from orbit, the Aegis's instruments began detecting rifts in reality itself forming around Nidra Prime. Space-time itself warped in swirling eddies, as if the planet had become the focus of a localized cosmic storm. Admiral Rhodes's response was immediate. Start emergency retrieval. We cannot allow them to complete that sequence. Shuttles on the planet's surface had been ordered to launch, and the Aegis was angling to bring covering fire to bear. But the rift emerging across the planet interrupted normal communications, and some parts of the weaponry in the Aegis glitched as targeting systems adjusted to the changing space-time flows. Sensing desperation among the Terrans, the core ramped up their attacks. If they could prevent the warship from escaping, the lens's effect might capture the Aegis completely. An already battered core cruiser lurched forwards, impacting the Terran hull in a kamikaze strike. The Aegis pitched violently in response, its deflector shield sputtering. Loose power cables sparked around in the corridors, and decks shook violently. Then another core frigate fired an antimatter warhead at point-blank range. The explosion that ensued nearly carved a section out of the Aegis's ventral plating. But Rhodes' glance turned from dread to revelation as it became clear the warship was taking actual damage. This had never occurred before. Not like this. Systems after systems flared red with warnings. Overall hull integrity decreased in some areas. Life support in the 4 compartments fluttered. Even the invincible Aegis could bleed. Yet the Terrans retaliated ferociously, slaughtering core warships in brutal return attack. In those last transmissions, the crew's indomitable spirit blazed. Wounded and fatigued weapon officers kept the main cannons operational, their will undiminished. Damage control teams, sprinting down flame-choked passageways, contained firefighting compartments. The Aegis's quantum singularity core, its heart, thrummed dangerously with the strain, the engineers barely able to keep it from slipping out of alignment. Finally, the wounded shuttles from the surface rose up, navigating the meandering lines of chaotic energy bending around the planet. Captain Rourke, who led the rescue party, sent an elated call. "We have the data. Request immediate docking clearance." But as the shuttles drew near, a massive gravitational spike erupted from the half-activated quantum lens. A rift creased space, distorting the gravitational fields surrounding Nidra Prime. The hapless Terran shuttles were caught in the flux. Despite the best tractor beam-based efforts of the Aegis, 2 shuttles disappeared into the swirling anomaly, swallowed whole in a flash of spiraling luminescence. Only a single one made it, docking in a near-catastrophic crash that trapped the ground team's survivors deep inside the ship's guts. As she stared down the horrifying scale of the anomaly, Admiral Rhodes was forced to weigh her options. But the lens wasn't fully assembled, and the partial activation set off a runaway chain reaction. If not contained, it could rip a hole through subspace that would devastate a vast sector of the galaxy. With grim clarity, she also realized the core had miscalculated. So too were they at risk of this phenomenon, though they continued blindly onward. The war was set against the backdrop of an apocalypse. Then he wrote, "The lens must be destroyed now, or it is all lost," warning his crew. Only way to stop the meltdown was to neutralize the device at ground zero. But there was immense risk in diving so close to the planet. The twisting distortions can entrap the Aegis, dragging it to its ruin. The fate of billions overcame any reluctance. In a last-ditch effort, Rhodes brought Aegis in low orbit, dodging the gravitational pulses of the rift. The warship rained all of its weapons on a precision bombardment of the quantum lens's subterranean installation. Glimmers of nuclear flame ignited the surface of the planet as frenzied core frigates closed in to try to ram the Terrans. Every time the Aegis fired, it cleaved deeper into the planetary crust toward the lens's heart. This last gambit forced the warship to maintain its shield at partial, while redirecting power to planetary bombardment cannons. The core took its chance, bombarding the ship's unshielded flanks. Within minutes, a monstrous quake rattled the planet's bedrock, the unmistakable sign that the lens had been breached. Data from sensors registered an internal unraveling in the device's power network. The cataclysmic meltdown would not escape containment, but as a side effect, an enormous subspace shockwave formed around the planet's orbit. The core lurched back in terror, many of their ships bolting at overdrive. The Aegis had mere seconds to cut clear or be engulfed by the wave. Admiral Rhodes ordered the ship to rise, but the Aegis's engines had sustained heavy damage. Answers: plasma leaks, shredded hull plating, and failing warp drives delayed their escape. The planet's gravitational vortex swelled, belting arcs of curled energy. The once unstoppable warship, battered and mangled, lurched and groaned as its structural beams splintered. Sections of its hull ripped off, and whole decks opened up to space. This was the first time in history the Aegis had failed, not because an enemy had outsmarted it, but because of the ceaseless wrath of cosmic forces unleashed by the core's doomsday device. A last crescendo from the planet's surface, the meltdown stabilized, preventing a system-wide apocalypse. But the subspace shockwave still rolled outward, incorruptible, shredding its way into orbit. Aegis was tainted on its boundaries. Thousands of core ships were blasted apart in that moment, caught in the maelstrom of unimaginable energies. Admiral Rhodes and her officers, their parting transmissions laced with grief and defiance, prepared for the inevitable. The subspace wave swallowed them in a flash of tortured light. The warship's shredded remains, and those of thousands of core ships, disappeared into an ever-moving tapestry of cosmic distortion. Long-range sensors throughout the sector had detected a single, devastating bloom of quantum signatures, and then silence. This was how the legend fell. This was how the uncontainable war machine, the savior of humanity, disappeared into the void. Those last transmissions, pieces heavy with static and heartbreak both, would echo throughout the galaxy for years to come. And the greatest symbol of Earth's might and resilience had disappeared as if it had never been there at all. Weeks passed, the terrifying news spreading with a speed that no one could stop. The Aegis is dead. Upon receiving the official news from Terran High Command, entire colonies fell into despair. The once imposed confidence of Terran protection of Allied outposts gave way to their readjusted, tenuous alliances. If the Aegis, the most important single deterrent in all of the war, could be destroyed, then what hope was there for humanity? This left an immediate power void in the Orion sector. The core empire, bruised and deep in a lick-wounds phase, juggled attempts to interpret the fallout from the meltdown. Their doomsday device lay in ruins. Their forward fleets had been slaughtered, and they had lost untold vessels along with the Terran warship. And although reeling, the core sensed a new opportunity. The single greatest risk to their expansion had been neutralized. Some core war councils tentatively considered a new offensive, while others, equally alarmed by the power of the meltdown, countered that they would need to be more circumspect. Other hostile forces like the Grax Dominion and Trellic Unity also saw opportunity. For years, they had looked for ways to evade or overwhelm the Aegis. Now that obstacle gone, they debated to push the advantage against human colonies. The diplomatic channels filled with frantic missives from Terran ambassadors, begging for peace or at the very least a cessation of hostilities. The galaxy set a powder keg, one match spark from exploding into a new wave of slaughter. Emotions ran raw within Terran space. Panic, grief, and rage blended into a combustible brew. Billions had believed to the core the belief that the Aegis would shield them from anything. Then, belief in the Terran Star Force faded. Soldiers who once wore the warship's insignia like a badge of honor were haunted by visions of bent metal and ghostly decks. Civilians, still reeling from news reports laden with grim speculation, braced for the worst. Hardliners in the political factions blamed Terran leadership for gambling the Aegis in a foolhardy mission. Others called for revenge against the core at any price. Amid the chaos, Terran High Command raced to reconstruct the Aegis's last hours. Partial data came from survivors of the ground mission on Nidra Prime. Captain Rourke, badly injured in the shuttle crash landing, described the savage battle on the planet's surface, the last stand, to sabotage the quantum lens, the unstoppable wave of core drones, and the glimpses he'd had of the warship hovering in low orbit, bruised but defiant. He described Admiral Rhodes's dauntless mentality, even to the last second, when the subspace shockwave swept over the horizon. A digital record retrieved from the gutted shuttle's computers provided clues to the chain of events leading to the meltdown. The lens had been sabotaged, and that stopped the cataclysm from the entire area. In that sense, the Aegis had achieved the mission of its design, protecting millions of lives from the core's perverse aim. But the price could hardly be calculated. Yet Terran leadership had already come to understand that, at least for now, the greater threat from the core, the doomsday device, had vanished. But at what cost to humanity's future, though? Slowly the bitter realization sunk in. The warship was unrecoverable. Recon drones deployed to Nidra Prime reported only debris in orbit, most of which appeared to belong to core frigates, the others, ships of unknown design. The Aegis's massive hull was nowhere to be found. Close-lens scans of the distortions left in subspace revealed residual quantum anomalies that could have ripped the vessel into dozens of pieces, scattering each to the far corners of slipspace. There was no hope of salving it. There was not even a grave to go to lament. Public announcements from Earth's government attempted to reassure the public. In a dark address, The planetary president proclaimed, "The Aegis did not die in vain. It put everything on the line to save us from an existential threat. Let its sacrifice be a rallying cry. We must stand united." But beneath the rhetoric was real uncertainty. Without the deterrent presence of the flagship, how would Terran fleets hold the line against multiple enemy powers? In starbase halls and dusty outposts, stories of the Aegis circulated, each taller and more extravagant than the last. Veterans recalled its unbreakable shields and unstoppable firepower. Engineers having talk about how the warship's advanced technology had torn whole dreadnoughts apart. But now these tales seemed like the legends of a lost era. A silent sense of dread slithered through the hearts of all who had once gazed toward that vessel as the last line of defense. Civilizations from beyond also had a visceral reaction to the news. Longtime rivals the Trellic Unity, who had sent grudging admirers in the Aegis's direction, extended official condolences, invoking the bravery of Terran hearts. In their wake, smaller species that had relied on Terran defense started striking under-the-table agreements to ensure their own survival, uncertain whether the depressed Terrans could repel the next invasion. Even the leadership of the core empire, grappling with internal turmoil, faltered on a new offensive. They had lost the superweapon they had hoped would change the world, and the aftershocks of the meltdown were making them wonder whether their entire region was now stable. But ironically, they also came to an understanding that humanity, absent its warship, might be soft enough to beat with typical armies. The question was whether they still had the strength to do it. Across Terran space, a hushed mourning enveloped the armed forces. The Admiralty sat in grim conference rooms surrounded by data reflecting a far more humble future, in which the Star Force would have to make do with diminished fleets and fast fighters and various capital ships that, while potentially deadly to prey much less exalted than the Aegis, would always seem insignificant in its shadow. Plans began to be floated for a new warship project, which was tentatively called the Aegis II, though many skeptics felt no ship could take on that same unstoppable illusion. At the same time, those who had served on the fallen flagship grappled with survivor's guilt. Dozens of crew had been on leave or temporary duty elsewhere and were spared the final mission. One of them, Commander Sonia Beck, had managed shield operations aboard the Aegis for years. Reassigned right before the disastrous trip to Nidra Prime, she could barely shake those what-ifs. Nightmares of countless unstoppable explosions rattling the hull, the deck heaving beneath her feet, glimpses of Admiral Rhodes' unyielding mask as everything fell apart. Now she walked through starports, dodging looks of pity and the constant, "I'm so sorry," from fellow workers. But glimmers of hope emerged from the gloom. A new spirit of solidarity swept through humanity's allies. Most realized that the Aegis's ultimate stand had prevented a galaxy-wide apocalypse. If activated in full, the lens could have decimated not just Earth, but entire blocks of the Orion region. This awareness brought forth a torrent of empathy from unexpected places. Diplomats from smaller polities, once too intimidated to express themselves, put their weight behind Terran-led coalitions. And if the Terrans had put everything on the line to protect the galaxy, perhaps they were worth following. Within the Terran Star Force, a new motto began to circulate: "Remember the Aegis." This rallying cry inspired recruits to enlist in droves, eager to fill the void left by their fallen champion. Shipyards worked almost around the clock to churn out more cruisers, carriers, and frigates. Scientists refined the technology they had, driven to replicate or even outdo the feats once done by the now iconic flagship. In their training, soldiers spoke to a legacy anew, one born of the ultimate sacrifice at Nidra Prime. Even the Corps, still recovering from their near apocalypse, found themselves embroiled in a civil war. The meltdown had ravaged their forward fleets, left their most coveted doomsday device mangled, and bred mistrust among the Empire's controlling families. Some of the more powerful Corps aristocrats called for a fast conquest of Terran space, thinking they might gain from the absence of the Aegis. Others, horrified at how close they had come to cosmic doom, called for careful diplomacy. The Empire's leadership had reached a turning point: commit to war or attempt a new course, knowing that the meltdown had taken a toll greater than they were willing to confess. But everywhere in the galaxy, one fact remained: the unstoppable had fallen. A chapter had closed, and that shift would echo for years to come, realigning war councils, diplomatic negotiating tables, and the hearts of innumerable beings. Humanity now stood on the precipice. Would her people break under the weight of insurmountable odds and countless loss, or would they embrace the valor that gave birth to their greatest warship and shatter a cycle of ruin? In those uncertain days, survivors held fast to Admiral Rhodes's final known words, from logs of a malfunctioning shuttle recovered amid the debris. "We are not our own," she had proclaimed, seconds before justifying the final bombardment of the quantum lens. "If everything we have to lose so that we sacrifice ourselves so that others will live, so be it." Those words rang out over Terran space, an echo of heroism that no subspace anomaly would silence. Word spread of the Aegis's last stand across even the distant frontier outposts, where beleaguered Terran frigates protected lonesome colonies orbiting dim stars. The same feeling of deep sadness and awe prevailed. Everywhere, they built candles at memorials and shared stories of the flagship's gallant deeds, and they gave thanks for the many lives saved by its ultimate sacrifice. The propaganda posters that once touted the Aegis as an unbeatable guardian now became memorials celebrating its gallant death. At the capital planet of Earth, a grand memorial took place. Through it all, thousands of uniformed soldiers, civilians, and allies from our sovereign species passed us in a magnificent procession. Hollow columns of black stone, engraved with the names of the Aegis crew, ascended as silent testament to the cost of war. A hush fell over the audience as the planetary president then recounted the ship's final mission, extolling Admiral Rhodes and her people who had averted a cosmic disaster that could have reordered the galaxy. Messages of condolence poured in even from neutral or hostile nations, many recognizing that a threat of such magnitude cut across petty rivalries. And behind the solemn ceremonies, Terran leadership wrestled with the new reality. Star maps on the walls of a conference room displayed contested systems now exposed by the lack of the mighty warship's deterrent effect. Plans were drawn for a new, more advanced vessel. But nothing like the Aegis's capabilities could be achieved for years. Until then, smaller ships would fill in the gaps, supported by new alliances and a common recollection of what mankind had given up. The loss of their premier warship made the Terrans seem both weaker and, oddly, more respected. Their dedication to saving the galaxy, even when it meant sacrificing their beloved flagship, made unlikely allies out of historically wary factions. For the one or two survivors like Captain Rourke and Commander Beck, the healing had just started. Guilt, grief, and unanswered questions remained. Some wanted to remain in uniform, hoping to honor their fallen comrades by continuing the fight. Others drifted into quiet roles behind the lines, their spirits too heavy to return to the battlefield. They bore the weight of memory, of that very last moment when unstoppable power became a sacrifice to a greater cause. The core empire was renowned for its ambition and testament to forward progress. The meltdown had shaken their belief in technological superiority. One faction in the empire even contacted the Terran paupers and offered an uneasy truce to prevent further catastrophes. Try not to speculate too heavily about whether the same species that unleashed a doomsday device might take a new course, chastened by the near destruction of an entire region of space. Only time would tell. In corner bars, in starport waiting lounges, and in farmland communities, people traded stories of the day they discovered the Aegis had fallen. Some cried in the open, mourning the warship they thought could never die. Others took a steely resolve, knowing that if such a force could be destroyed, then all the more reason for everyday heroes to rise. The war raged on, but a glimmer of hope remained. If humanity's greatest symbol could face its doom while sparing billions of lives, maybe the legacy of its sacrifice would inspire a new protector. So the Aegis was gone, and the spirit of its fleet remained in every Terran warship that sailed beneath its flag, in every soldier that boarded a transport ship, bracing for whatever awaited the next segment of space. One line carved into the memorial at Earth's capital perfectly summed up the sentiment. They gave everything so that we might endure. Let us not abandon their gift. With that promise reverberating across star systems, humanity took a deep breath and took its first steps toward a new destiny born out of tragedy. The invincible were gone, but the metal they embodied would propel humanity on to whatever challenges the galaxy had in store.